Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the RecPoint Note. This is a smarter voice recorder that allows you to transfer and sync the notes over to your phone or computer. There's both a mobile app as well as a web app, and then transcribes it into text as well as give you translations if you are recording meetings, for example, in different languages. So it's technically powered by ChatGPT, and you're able to see summarized bullet points, mind maps, as well as a to-do list format that can condense the recording into something more concise. The actual hardware itself has 64 gigabytes of built-in storage, and compared to some of the other similar card-sized voice recorders that we've seen previously, cough cough, plod note, this one does seem to have a few new features, including a small OLED screen on the top, making it a little easier to gauge the status compared to the previous models didn't have any display, in addition to having a switch on the side that can be used to record calls. Very slim, actually weighs here at less than 40 grams, kind of like one of those Find My GPS location trackers that can also slide into a wallet pretty easily because it is pretty much credit card sized, not that much larger than that, but definitely feels quite premium because it is crafted out of aluminum unibody, having these stripes on the front, which makes it look a little bit more distinctive, slightly easier for gripping as well. And then on the back here, we also have some pogo contacts, which are used for charging. Now on a single charge, it can record up to 30 hours of audio, which is also decent. You can turn it on and off when it's not in use, or last around 80 hours on standby time. And you can also use that cable to transfer over the recordings manually instead of using the wireless functionality, since it has built-in Bluetooth using the mobile app or the web app. So there's kind of two ways of accessing those recordings inside of the memory. Now, like previous models though, it does not seem like it has any expandable storage because it is so slim. So maybe in a future gen revision, if they had a micro SD card slot to further augment that, if you need even longer recording sessions, that could be something to consider. But as it stands, it comes in this one configuration. On the very top, you also see two microphones for picking up sound and doing some ambient noise reduction as well. Now, the record key, if you press for a little bit longer, also acts as a power button. We can see the small OLED screen there flick on to life. And this thing has a small haptic vibration motor as well, similar to a phone, that gives you a subtle buzz whenever you turn it on and start or stop recording as confirmation. And then aside from the actual Note recorder, you'll also see a quick user guide with a QR code to download the mobile app for both iOS, iPhones, and Android devices as well, in addition to a little wallet case, which is a convenient extra, slides in pretty easily, crafted out of this synthetic leather texture and protects it when not in use, but still leaves the microphones on the top accessible. So even here, you can start to record notes and interact with the controls without necessarily taking it out of the case, which is thoughtful, and perhaps more importantly, still accessing the main functions, including charging, and also the wallet case here adds a magnet, allowing you to stick it onto MagSafe enabled iPhones, as well as Qi 2 enabled Android devices, and other phones in general that has a MagSafe sticker adapter attached. In fact, they give you one of those in the box as well. You can peel it off like a 3M sticky, and then attach it onto the back of your phone or case to make it attached onto the case. In fact, here is one such example. We can just pop this onto this MagSafe sticker onto the back of this phone, and it actually is a pretty tight magnetic connection, doesn't feel loose, and adds relatively minimal thickness, I would say, even if you're using it in the case. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, aren't some of these features perhaps overlapping with some of the features found on flagship smartphones? For example, on Google Pixel devices, as well as newer iPhones, are starting to have a more advanced recorder app that also gives you some transcription capabilities. And my response to that is yes, if you already have a flagship smartphone from brands like Google or iPhone, even some Samsung devices, then a separate recorder like this may not be absolutely necessary unless you have more of a mid-range phone or a device from other manufacturers like Motorola, for example, OnePlus, which may not have as robust of a built-in translation and transcription app on the phone by default. Then adding that feature by purchasing an accessory like this probably makes more sense instead of buying a completely new phone just for that functionality if you find it to be useful as a student or professional. But the other second part is, I guess, the feature set of the app component is a little bit more advanced because aside from recording and transcribing, it also generates again the summarization function, creating a mind map view, bullet points, various visualization formats, plus having that web app functionality where the notes are instantly synced over to the desktop. So you can open up their URL on any Mac, Windows, Linux computer, Chromebook, and see the same notes once you've transferred them over to your account and just sign in. And also, again, having those 64 gigs of built-in storage doesn't occupy, I guess, physical space on your phone's memory, keeping a backup copy of your recordings inside of this little card, kind of like a thumbstick or memory card. So those are some of the areas where a design like this might make sense depending on your workflow. Plus, last but not least, I would say maybe there are certain meetings or lectures where a phone isn't allowed by the administrator or by a teacher or proctor, in which case you can still use a offline voice recorder like this, and then later on translate as well as transcribe the results when you do sync them over to the app. Kind of like in certain schools or workplaces, if a phone isn't allowed, some people use an older style MP3 player to listen to music. That could be another reason to consider a dedicated hardware like this. That being said, there is still one caveat similar to other ChatGPT-powered devices we've seen previously. Again, similar to paying for Gemini Pro, or if you're using a higher volume of requests from ChatGPT, it's the same story here because they're technically using ChatGPT behind the scenes. And so right now they're saying if you purchase it, you will get a couple of months of free service unlocking the kind of pro membership until early 2026. Granted, you can fall back onto a free plan that gives you just more limited minutes of transcription and summarization that you can do each month. You can still technically use it without paying for an extra subscription. And also, if you're using it as a regular voice recorder, it's really the step where you then turn those audio recordings into notes that, again, ChatGPT is leveraged. So just keep that in mind. If you fall over into the free membership tier, it might actually be fine if you're just sporadically recording some phone calls, using it just for the most important lectures or meetings, compared to if you want to record everything and you're leveraging hundreds of hours of transcription and summarization, then that's a case where you'll definitely need to consider the costs in the future. And now opening up the companion mobile app here first, we've got a couple of tutorials, and then we can tap here to connect. As long as Bluetooth and location services are turned on with your phone, you'll be able to then find the nearby RecPoint recorder and then tap to bind it to the mobile app. You can see some of that status info on the screen here as well. Afterwards, tapping on the connected device, we can see the battery health remaining, as well as the current capacity inside of the recorder's memory at 64 gigs. Also check for any firmware updates, and also change the mic gain or the sensitivity in terms of recording even when it's more quiet versus more of an average recording volume. You can also completely reformat or delete everything on the recorder's built-in memory. And for transferring over audio recordings, you can choose actually between either Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. So that's actually a function that seems to be unlocked through a recent update that might be a little bit faster if you have really large recordings that have hours and hours in a single session. Some of those bigger files using Wi-Fi's bandwidth will be faster than Bluetooth. So let's begin a recording here by long pressing for 2 seconds. We can see this visualization pop on. It also tells us that the recording is in progress. Just talking normally here and trying to pick up my voice. Test 1 2 3. How does it work? As we are in a room that has a little bit of a quiet fan noise in the background. We can press for 2 seconds to turn off the recording again, and the recording has been ended. We can also see that the new note has been transferred over, represented by this little red dot. So again, working decently. If you aren't paired to your phone, if this is, somewhere in your pocket or in a completely different room, you can still just have the recording save onto the built-in memory, and again, transfer them over once you open up the app on your phone or the computer later on. But yeah, seems like syncing over data is relatively quick. You can also briefly gauge the power percentage remaining. If you are using it in the detached way, you'll see that the Bluetooth icon is no longer visible. And so indeed, we can see the recordings have been captured in the built-in storage, which we can then tap on and then begin to transfer over to the app, taking just a couple of seconds there. And in terms of how they are labeled, you can see that the first recording that we tested actually was labeled as a call versus the second one was just a general recording. And that is simply categorized based on this slider button on the side. So again, if it's red, it means you want to record a call, versus if you are swiping it down, it's going to be labeled as a general audio recording. So overall, again, the recording quality itself is not bad in terms of the microphone does pick up my voice without too many issues. It doesn't sound too tinny either. However, there is a little bit of interference if you are moving it around. Some wind noise, slight muffling gets picked up as well, since there isn't a condenser sponge on this. So I think that's why having this little wallet case actually might be beneficial, because the fabric might be dampening some of those vibrations if you are moving it around. Just keep that in mind. But generally, if you're setting it down onto a table when you hit on record, it still sounds clean enough. You can also change the playback speed, slowing it down, speeding it up. And then tapping on the generate button here, actually there's an interesting pop-up prompt that says the recording is less than 60 seconds, no need to transcribe. And so it has a software prompt where if your recordings are short enough, concise enough, it doesn't need to condense it further into notes. It's already quite short, which I think the idea or intent behind it is good, but I would still like them to give you the option of ideally transcribing it into a text version that you can copy and paste if you wanted to. So right now you have to be looking at notes which are over 1 minute in duration to access the second step features. But here's an example of a recording that's slightly longer, that's around 3 minutes in length. And in this particular example, we are able to press on that generate key to see the speaker being identified, and you're also able to see line by line what is being said. You can also tap on certain portions to jump into that specific section of the recording as well as make any corrections just by tapping on the content modification text box if there are any errors. But similar to smart translators that we've seen previously, I would rate it around 90% accurate. So most of the sentences in terms of punctuation will be correctly captured unless you're speaking with specific jargon. And when you are generating these summaries, you can also change the input language as well. So again, there's over 100 languages that are recognized currently, including other ones like Spanish, Italian, French, Russian, so on and so forth, just swiping down, as well as other dialects of languages as well. If there's different types of pronunciation, you can tap accordingly to make the recognition a little more accurate. And the second tab over here also generates the quick summary. It is surprisingly clear and again gives you some table formats as well with some bold fonts to really emphasize keywords which are going to be important. So definitely makes it a little easier, especially if your recording is super long and you want to condense it into the most essential information. And then that's where a tool like this can definitely be helpful for students and professionals that do a lot of collaboration work. Now you can also tap on the summary template and they give you some more examples, which actually shows a bit more of detail as well compared to past similar AI-powered recorders that I've seen. For example, I think the Plot Note, when it originally came out, only had a general summary format. You just tap and it just creates it. But on here, they're further separating into other examples like interview style, key point style, lawyer, as well as discussion, speech, so on and so forth. And for all of these having a slightly different formatting. Now the next tab over is going to be the mind map view, one of the visualizations. You can see this kind of tree branch that just tells you the main points and then further going into more examples. If you prefer this style instead, perhaps for studying or again referencing more complex information that might be harder to grasp how they're all linked together and connected, you can see this kind of bird's eye view using the mind map method instead. Now, it might not be suitable for every type of recording, but it's an interesting way of representing logic and flow that does make sense in other scenarios. And then the final tab over is going to be translate. So we can choose a secondary language, for example, French in this case, and it has translated the main points into French language instead to reference. And in terms of the top here, there's a tab that you can click on to share either the audio recording, the transcript, summary, or mind maps. And the links here will last for around 7 days before they get deleted from the servers. But you can also share this with other colleagues. And instead of generating a share link or URL, you can also export the files directly and then share that onto your own, maybe Dropbox, to other colleagues and friends more persistently if you prefer this method instead as an attachment. So not bad in terms of general functionality. The UI does seem pretty clean. For example, this one is recording a TED Talk, and it is an example of how a lecture might work, capturing, again, certain phrases and what that particular phrase actually means, and giving you sub-bullet points as well. Pretty powerful, I would say, almost like having a note taker that is making you a more efficient learner, which is actually kind of scary. Helping us learn more in a shorter period of time, maybe also for cramming, cough, cough. Now, here's a couple of other examples of the mind map in progress. This is also one where I think perhaps doesn't necessarily work quite as nicely in this particular case. I mean, you can see the logic being tied together. However, some of the sentences inside of the mind map are a little bit longer, so it just seems a bit more stretched out. Now, there's also a universal search function over here for the title of specific recordings that you're able to type in and find those relevant recordings. But it looks like you aren't necessarily able to search for the entire text inside, even if it's been already transcribed like we saw, which I think is a function they should add. So for example, if there's a certain keyword like chapter or experimentation, they should also pull up the relevant recording as well. That can be a little bit more intelligent. You can select multiple files to delete or even merge together into a single longer file. And what's kind of funny is on the top, there's also an AI-powered assistant, which is also using a large language model like ChatGPT to answer questions that you have about the product itself, kind of an AI troubleshooting tool on top of the AI translation and transcription. Bottom key here, by the way, also allows you to start to record, and that will trigger the microphone here starting to capture as well with the same capabilities. Now, finally, under the Me tab, this is where you can gauge your monthly quota. So right now, for example, it looks like we have 600 minutes of transcription that it's able to give us per month and around 1,200 minutes of translation. In other words, around 10 hours of audio recordings per month are included, or around 20 hours of translations. And if you tap inside, you can also see some more details. For example, again, you get the service until end of the current year, but after that period is over, you'll get slightly less in terms of the free quota per month, around 360 minutes or 720 translation minutes, roughly equivalent to 6 hours of audio recording that you're able to use the AI to transcribe into text with all the visualizations for free, even if you don't pay for the Pro plan. So just keep that in mind. That is mostly in line with other similar products we've seen previously. However, what does seem a little bit more stingy is you can only use one default template if you are in the starter plan. So all the other templates that we saw earlier in terms of lawyer, notes, recordings, meetings, that kind of summarizes it in a slightly different format is not going to be accessible unless you get the Pro membership, which I guess is a little bit of a shame, including Ultra as well as Unlimited, of course, being the highest tier over there. The very bottom here also features a monthly versus an annual way of purchasing some of those subscription plans. In fact, speaking of limited time duration use, they even have a time boost package which can add a certain number of minutes instead of having it based on month. So for example, if you just need 120 more minutes of transcription, 240 more minutes of translation, you can get some of these add-on packs and giving you a little bit more flexibility, I guess. But yeah, generally speaking, not the biggest fan of subscription services, period. Although, again, since it is technically using the more premium servers from ChatGPT, there is that hidden cost that is dependent on volume, like many of the AI-type products which are using models like this. One thing I will say, though, is it seems like if you are having an international meeting where you have different speakers all speaking in different languages, it might not be able to as accurately transcribe everything. I mean, yes, you're able to access the translation function here, but that's kind of a second step. It will first take the transcribed text and then put it into that second language, instead of, for example, if you have French, Spanish, Chinese speaker all talking simultaneously, it might be a little bit more tricky for the current software to identify different languages in that first transcription tab. Just a side note there. But anyways, you can see that it's not bad in terms of general responsiveness, and it has correctly identified in this recording a couple of different speakers. So if we play back a snippet,
Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. You know the drill, right? We're all about cutting through the clutter, finding those nuggets of knowledge on a device that's making waves.
so you can see that it is identifying the correct number of speakers here on the side, which is not bad, allowing us to type in the names of these speakers here, as well as the third speaker at the very bottom here was me, after listening to the recording, and it has indeed worked here just fine in terms of recognizing the number of speakers. And the summary part is also automatically generated whenever you tap on transcribe. They aren't separately counted, so that's kind of interesting. Once you have the text version for copying, you also see the notation format here as well. Now, having said that, maybe in a version down the line, they can also give you the ability to add some prompting. For example, I want to make this even more concise or elaborate on points I didn't really understand, drawing in some other information that I can find from the web. Since right now it's mostly automatically generated, you can't really change the length, but still it is a pretty neat view to have this at one click. So this is the full translation into Spanish, and now line by line everything is spoken in Spanish, again looking pretty decent in terms of general accuracy, although of course the recording is still going to be in the original language, which was English. Furthermore, when you create an account, RecPoint also gives you 1 GB of cloud storage within the app, so cloud files can be referenced on, again, the web app. You can also see here whether these files have been backed up to the cloud or not. Although, interestingly enough, even on the more expensive membership plans, it looks like the cloud storage part is still capped at 1 GB, which I think ideally should be a little higher on the Pro or Ultra plans, or maybe they plan on unlocking this separately. In an ideal world, it would give you the flexibility of using some other cloud services like Google Drive, for example, for backup purposes as well. We don't necessarily get that integration within their app at the moment. Also, tabbing on the sidebar here allows us to see which files are stored locally. We can recategorize some of the recordings, add them as separate folders for easier management, and also sort by date created or date uploaded. And now taking a look at their web app, we can sign in with our account. Afterwards, you'll be able to see all of the recordings which have been synced over onto your cloud storage and be able to play this back as well on the computer, in addition to seeing the same kind of labels that we had on the mobile view, which we can still zoom in and out with a mouse, maybe looking a little bit better on a bigger screen. Not bad in terms of the UI, giving us a couple of different columns there side by side, plus the translation as well. So all of these features are carried over into the desktop view. Now, perhaps in the future, they can add a few more file formats being supported for the different documents that you're exporting. That would be even better. Right now, the text is saved as a Word file, but being able to choose a PDF or a text file might also be nice options to have. But right now it is certainly functional, and we are able to open it up in something like Google Docs or in Microsoft Word in terms of the summarized result, if you don't want to just directly copy and paste, which is another option here as well. So there we have it. That is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the RecPoint Note, which is the smarter voice recorder that has, again, the software component there that takes the recordings and adds in the translation, transcription, as well as summarization forms. From the perspective of connectivity, I actually didn't have too many issues either. It was rather reliable as long as you have, again, Bluetooth and location services turned on. Syncing was relatively quick. The hardware does feel quite premium and is perhaps a slight step above some of the previous gen models we've seen when it comes to getting some more attention to detail in the build. Actual performance in terms of the audio pickup as well as the accuracy of the transcriptions also do seem to be performing pretty nicely. So yeah, I would say if you are in the market for a dedicated voice recorder or one that just adds in some more advanced functionality of taking those recordings and then transforming them into a more summarized form, this might be an interesting option to consider. Again, especially for students as well as professionals, often in meetings or certain interviews, this can actually be a pretty powerful tool. So you can learn more in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That was a closer look at the RecPoint Note voice recorder.